Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. All right, so now that we finally have the application up and working, we have a RESTful API, and you can see this is an example of it. This is the Django REST framework version of it. If I do .json, you can see just the standard JSON data that's being returned from the server. There's currently only one band on the server named Bayside, best band ever, and we're going to go ahead and use React on our index page. The site looks real ugly at the moment. I really haven't even designed what it's going to look like. I'll probably end up getting some sort of bootstrap template or something along those lines. But for right now, we're just going to be working on React fundamentals. And the next few videos are going to be aimed towards that. So let's go ahead and we're going to start by creating a React component that will list all the bands on this index page. And I want to name that React file index React. And in the previous video, we had actually created that file, and we had pointed to it. We didn't actually create the file, but we pointed to it here, index React.jsx. So hopefully you guys know, but the preferred method of writing React code is to use a JSX syntax, which is almost like its own language, but all it is just basically what they call sugar-coated JavaScript. So it's just a way of making JavaScript a little bit easier to read, making it almost like XML or similar to XAML if you've ever used WPF or C# with the WinForms or the WinForms successor. So the JSX though is kind of a pain in the ass to learn. Initially you're like, why do I have to take this extra step? But it's really worthwhile because JavaScript can be a real bear to try to read and write with, especially when you're designing templates and component hierarchy and everything. Trying to visualize the JavaScript is very, very difficult. So that's the reason why we're going to use JSX. Hopefully, I mean, I was kicking and screaming with using it. In fact, I moved away from React like on 2 separate occasions. I was like, I'm not dealing with this JSX nonsense. But I finally came around. I realized that React and JSX is good. React, in my opinion, is much better than Angular or Backbone or any of that stuff or Knockout. I think React is the best thing, and you see all these other frameworks like Ember and everything scrambling because of what React is doing. So they obviously have things going pretty well for them, and they've done things really, really correct on their end. So anyway, that being said, we're going to use JSX. So let's go ahead and create that JSX file. Now you're going to notice a lot of editors don't have JSX support since it's so new. I'm using PyCharm right here, and it doesn't support JSX. The few things that do work, like the latest WebStorm, Sublime Text is probably the best bet to go with because it's free to evaluate for as long as you feel like the evaluation process is necessary. The other editor would be Atom, Atom.io I think is what it's called, but that supports JSX. But anyway, you probably need something though that isn't going to throw a bunch of errors at you when you start writing JSX, because any JavaScript compiler IntelliSense is not going to work with this JSX stuff. Unfortunately, if you're using Visual Studio like I like to use, you're out of luck at the moment, and you will be until Visual Studio 2015 comes out. So let's go ahead and create the JSX file that we had talked about, and it's called index React, and we're going to put it in the standard static JavaScript folder. So index React. Oh shoot, I gave it a .js extension. I needed to say .jsx, so we're going to rename that. In fact, I'll just delete the damn thing. Alright, so now we have the index React file. First things first, whenever you're dealing with React, is you need to go ahead and create a component. So the component is going to be the outermost component. We're going to call it just band component. And the convention is when you're naming the components that they should be capitalized. Every word should be capitalized. So don't Don't camel case it. And we need to go ahead and say React.create class. And a few things that every React component needs is that it needs to have a render function. And the render function is always going to return, when you're dealing with JSX, it's always going to return something. It has to return something. And it's going to expect that whatever it returns, it's got to return a parent, child, grandchild type of setup. So you can't have something like this. You can't say div test div and then have another div, because these are siblings. This isn't a true parent-child relationship. This isn't going to work. In order for something like that to work, both of these have to share the same parent. So something like this would work because they have one parent, child, child. These are siblings to each other. These could have children. Whatever. Everything needs to be encapsulated though in one particular outermost div within your return statement. So that's going to bite you at least 1 or 2 times before you get used to that. And you're going to forget what I'm talking about probably in like 10 minutes, and you're going to do that and it's not going to work. So anyway, just forewarning, you have to have this thing wrapped in an outermost div. Now with JSX, it's going to be interesting that when you're giving a class to your component hierarchy or to your component, your HTML is not exactly the same. Now this looks like standard HTML right here, but if you're going to use class, you can't say class equals test class. That's not going to work. Classes have to be referenced in camel case. So class name is how you actually define a class, which is weird, but you're going to get used to it. One of the good things about React is that you can actually encapsulate CSS styles. So it's almost like Google Polymer's project, where they have this thing called Shadow DOM, where you can have individual components that comprise your HTML page, and those individual components point to their own JavaScript and their own images, their own CSS. So you can encapsulate and truly encapsulate the entire thing into a component, which is really where jQuery plugins fall short, because jQuery plugins, you have to have all this code and stuff, and you have all these variables and things that get introduced into the global namespace, and you can have naming clashes and stuff like that. Google Polymer's project is trying to do away with that with a hidden DOM. Well, React already is doing it, and they've been doing it for a long time, and they use something called the virtual DOM. So this virtual DOM, we're able to encapsulate styles by declaring them as simple JavaScript objects. And let's go ahead and do that now. So this is going to be our variable test style. And we'll say equals, and it's just a curly brace is just like a standard object in JavaScript. Now, this is where you would define your CSS styles, but the things, the way you say them are different, because you can't have hyphens. So you can't be like font size 18 pixels. You can't do that because this isn't valid JavaScript. You can't have the hyphen. So just remember, anything that has a hyphen or separate words or anything like that, it's all going to be camel case. So it gets easy to get used to after a while. But font size 18 pixels, and then each style here, you would just make it comma delimited, just like any sort of standard key value JavaScript object. So font size, and we could say like margin right. Once again, that's camel case, so instead of hyphen, we could just say 20 pixels. And you don't need these semicolon. But anyway, here is an object, which is a self-contained style for this particular component. And I'm going to get rid of this class name for right now. And we can give it the style tag. And in order to assign a variable inside of your return statement, you have to wrap it in these curly braces. This is another thing that takes a little bit to get a hang of. So in order to reference any sort of functions that you may define inside the band component object, we're going to get into functions here in a moment, but or any variables that you create. Like you see here, test style is an object. So in order to reference that inside your render, you have to have that in the curly braces. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's put some text in here. I'll say is this, because it will be. Now that we have that component defined, React needs to be able to actually render that component somewhere. So in order to do that, we need to go ahead and say React.render. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to use this XML type of formatting where we can say band component, and then make sure there's a comma there, and on a new line we're going to use standard document.get element by ID, which is just standard JavaScript, and we're going to find a ID to attach this React component to. So content, the ID does not exist in our template, so let's go ahead and add that now. And since we're dealing with the index page, let's go ahead and do it here. So we'll just create a div ID equals content. Now that we've done all that, let's go ahead and upload a few things. I need to upload my index and my master page. And I also want to upload my JavaScript so that it can have that development JavaScript that we're working on right now. So now, let me get rid of this Chris Hawkes thing, that's confusing. Alright, so you can see that React has now rendered this div that we defined. And when we look at it and we inspect element, you can see that the style is given the proper inline styling, so font size. So we've encapsulated the styles for this. And you can see over here it's definitely rendered at 18 pixels. It's completely encapsulated, so you can never have this thing clashing with another style or anything like that. And we could have defined a class name like I showed you before we decided to go with the inline style. So I mean, it can point to a standard external class. Obviously most people want to do that for a lot of the markup and stuff. But inline styles are not the horrible thing that they are of the past, because they're encapsulated, and the component itself reuses those inline styles, so it's not a big pain. You just have to update your component and all the inline styles for thousands of components that may use that style object will be updated. So anyway, it's if you've been told in the past that you shouldn't use inline styles, it really doesn't matter when you're using React. In fact, it's good because, like I said, it's encapsulated. Alright, you can see that React creates these IDs on here so it can keep track of all its elements. In the next video, we're going to get into some additional functions on how we add some basic capabilities to this little plain React component that we have going on right now. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Bye.